Michael Hartford stood before the judge when his wife's lawyer rose with a cruel smile on his lips. Marcus Trent held a yellow envelope as if it were a loaded weapon. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Diana, seated at the opposite table, avoided Michael's gaze. The lawyer opened his mouth and said the words that would make everything collapse. Asterisk, settle before I present the evidence that will destroy you forever. Asterisk. Michael felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Before we continue with this devastating story, if you enjoy narratives that stir your emotions, make you reflect on family sacrifice, and the impossible choices we face in extreme moments, hit the like button right now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any story like this one. And in the comments, tell me, could you forgive someone who made a decision that cost you everything you had? Leave your opinion. Now, let's go to the story. 3 months before that moment in court, Michael Hartford was in a very different place. He was at the top of Clingman's Dome Mountain, watching a column of black smoke rise on the western horizon. The radio on his belt crackled with tense voices. The wind blew hard, carrying the unmistakable smell of burning wood. Michael was 38 years old, with 16 years of experience as a wildland firefighter in the National Park Service. He knew those mountains like the lines of his own hand, every trail, every stream, every vulnerable point where fire could spread like gunpowder. And at that moment, watching the smoke, he knew exactly what was about to happen. The fire had started 3 days earlier, about 15 miles north, near the town of Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Lightning had struck a dry tree during a storm without rain. It was October, and the region was going through the worst drought in 40 years. The autumn leaves that should have been damp were dry as paper. The fire had begun small, but with wind and dry vegetation, it gained strength quickly. Michael was part of the immediate response team. In the first 2 days, they managed to contain the fire in a relatively small area, about 200 acres. But on the third night, everything changed. A cold front from Canada brought winds up to 60 miles per hour. The fire exploded. When Michael woke up that morning, the sky was orange. Ash fell like dirty snow. His phone kept ringing. He looked to the side of the bed. Diana was still asleep, her blonde hair spread on the pillow, her face calm. He hesitated for a moment, wanting to wake her, wanting to say something important, but he didn't. He just kissed her forehead and left quietly. That decision would haunt him for months. Diana Hartford was 36 years old and the owner of the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort, a historic complex her family had managed for 3 generations. The resort sat on the slopes of the Great Smoky Mountains, about 10 miles south of Gatlinburg. It was a special place, with 12 rustic wooden cabins built in the 1920s. A main house that served as a restaurant and event center, and 50 acres of preserved forest. The place had soul, stories, memories of weddings, anniversaries, family reunions. Diana had inherited the resort from her father, Thomas Whitmore, who had died 2 years earlier of a sudden heart attack. Her father's death had devastated Diana, and she clung to the resort as if it were the last physical connection she had with him. Every wooden plank, every stone in the fireplace, every photograph on the walls represented her father, her grandfather, her family's entire history. But keeping the resort running was becoming increasingly difficult. The local economy had changed. Tourists now preferred modern hotels with high-speed Wi-Fi and heated pools. The Blue Ridge Heritage Resort was charming but expensive to maintain. The electrical systems were outdated. The plumbing needed constant repair. The roof of the main house had leaked last winter, costing $18,000 to fix. Diana had taken out loans to keep the place afloat first, a $50,000 loan from the local bank. Then, when that money ran out, she borrowed another $80,000 from a private lender, a man named Richard Dalton, who had a reputation for being ruthless with debtors. Michael knew about the financial troubles. He and Diana had argued about it many times. Michael suggested selling the resort and using the money to buy something smaller, more manageable, but Diana flatly refused. Selling the resort would be like betraying her father's memory. It was unthinkable. So Michael stopped insisting. He loved Diana. He understood that some things mattered more than money, or at least he thought he did. That morning, when Michael arrived at the fire command post, the situation was chaotic. Captain James Reeves, a 30-year veteran of wildland firefighting, was shouting orders in 3 directions at once. Maps were spread across an improvised table. Red lines showed the fire's progression, and those lines were moving far too fast. Captain Reeves saw Michael and motioned for him to come closer. We need to evacuate the south side. The fire is moving that way faster than we predicted. I want you to lead the evacuation team in the Mountain View Road area. Mountain View Road. Michael felt his stomach tighten. The Blue Ridge Heritage Resort was on Mountain View Road. He looked at the map again. The red line was less than 5 miles from the resort. With the current wind, the fire could reach it in under 6 hours. Michael grabbed his radio and called Diana. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice sleepy. "Hello, Diana, it's Michael. You need to get out of there, now." There was a pause. What? What are you talking about? The fire is moving toward the resort. We're evacuating the entire Mountain View area. You need to grab what you can and leave, now. Diana's voice instantly changed from sleepy to fully alert. Wait, the fire's coming here. To the resort? Yes. And you've got maybe 5, 6 hours at most. You need to go. Michael, I can't just leave. I have guests here. I have responsibilities. Besides, are you sure? I mean, 5 miles is still far. Diana, I'm not asking. I'm telling you as a firefighter. You need to evacuate. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Diana said, in the stubborn tone he knew too well, I'll think about it. I need to assess the situation here. There's nothing to assess. Get out of there. Michael, you're overreacting. You always overreact when it comes to the resort. You want me to panic and do something stupid. That's not fair, and you know it. I know this place better than anyone. My father went through fires before. In 1987, there was a fire 3 miles from here, and nothing happened to the resort. We have the pond, we have the sprinkler systems. We'll be fine. Michael felt frustration rising in his throat. Diana, you don't understand how serious this is. This isn't like previous fires. The drought, the wind, everything's worse. You need to trust me. I do trust you, Michael, but I also trust my judgment. I'll monitor the situation. If it gets bad, I'll leave. I promise. Diana hung up before Michael could respond. He stood there, holding the dead phone in his hand, feeling dread spread through his chest. He knew that tone in her voice. She wasn't going to leave. She was going to stay and try to protect the resort because it was all she had left of her father, and there was nothing he could say over the phone to change her mind. Michael went back to Captain Reeves and explained the situation. The captain shook his head. She's got to go. Everyone does. Go there yourself if necessary. Take a team. Do a door-to-door evacuation in that whole area. Michael took 3 other firefighters and 2 vehicles. They drove south on Mountain View Road, stopping at every house, every property. Most people cooperated, loading cars with photographs, documents, pets. Some resisted. An old farmer named Earl Thompson refused to leave his cows. Michael had to convince him he could release them into the open fields, where they'd have a better chance of surviving than trapped in the barn. It took 3 hours to cover the whole road. The Blue Ridge Heritage Resort was the last stop. When Michael arrived, Diana was in the main courtyard giving orders to the 2 employees still there. She had turned on the sprinkler systems. Hoses were scattered across the ground. She had moved all the guests out. Their cars were gone, but she was still there. Michael got out of the vehicle. Diana turned to him, arms crossed. I knew you'd come. Diana, time's up. You need to go. Now I'm not letting this place burn. Michael, you don't have a choice. The fire's 3 miles away. You can see the smoke, he pointed. The column of black smoke now dominated the sky. Ash fell like macabre confetti. The smell of burning wood was suffocating. I've prepared everything. The sprinklers will keep the buildings wet. I've got the pond as a water reserve. We can save it. Michael stepped closer, his voice softening. Diana, I know what this place means to you. I know, but it's not worth your life. Your father wouldn't want you to die trying to save wood and nails. Diana's eyes filled with tears. It's not just wood and nails, it's everything. It's my story, my family's story. If I lose this, I lose my father all over again. Michael felt his heart break. He reached out his hand. You won't lose your father. He's here. He placed his hand over her heart. He's in you, not in a building. Diana wiped her tears. She looked at the resort, at the cabins her grandfather had built with his own hands, at the main house where she'd married Michael 5 years before. Then she looked back at him. Promise me one thing. Anything. If there's any chance to save this place, you'll try. Promise me. Michael hesitated. He knew he shouldn't make that promise. But seeing Diana there, heartbroken, he couldn't say no. I promise. Diana nodded. Then she turned to the 2 employees. Let's go. They got into the vehicles. Michael saw Diana take one last long look at the resort through the rearview mirror before following the others down the road. He stayed behind for a few more minutes, checking the sprinkler systems, making sure everything was working. Then he left too. He didn't know he was seeing the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort for the last time. The fire reached it in less than 4 hours. Michael was at the command post when the news came. The wind had shifted unexpectedly. The fire, which should have gone east, turned southeast. It was moving at a terrifying speed, consuming everything in its path, and it was heading directly toward an area that hadn't been fully evacuated. Captain Reeves was on the radio, coordinating teams. We've got reports of people trapped in Pine Valley. We need all available units for immediate rescue. Michael knew Pine Valley. It was a small cluster of mobile homes at the mountain's base, mostly low-income workers and retirees. If those people were trapped with the fire coming, it would be a massacre. Michael, are you available? Captain Reeves asked. Yes, sir. Take your team and go to Pine Valley. Get everyone out. You've got maybe 40 minutes before the fire arrives. Michael gathered his team. They jumped into the vehicles and sped toward Pine Valley. The road was thick with smoke. Visibility was less than 50 feet. Michael drove with emergency lights flashing, horn blaring constantly. When they arrived at Pine Valley, it was like stepping into an apocalyptic movie scene. Most homes were empty, but some people were still there. An elderly woman named Margaret was trying to get her cat into a carrier. A man in a wheelchair was trapped on his porch because the ramp had broken. A family with 3 small children panicked because their car wouldn't start. Michael and his team worked fast. They helped Margaret with her cat. They carried the man in the wheelchair into the vehicle. They pushed the family's car aside and loaded them into their own. Then Michael saw something that made his blood run cold. A mobile home at the end of the street had a car in the driveway and movement inside. Someone was still there. Michael ran to the house and banged on the door. "Is anyone in there? You need to get out now." The door opened. A man in his 50s stood there holding a box of photographs. "Please help me. My wife is bedridden. She can't walk. I can't carry her alone." Michael went inside. The house was small and smelled of medicine. In the back bedroom, a thin woman lay in a hospital bed, connected to an oxygen tank. The man was on the verge of tears. "I didn't know what to do. We have nowhere to go. No family here." Michael looked at the woman. She met his eyes, frightened but steady. "Please, take my husband. I'll be fine." "No one's staying," Michael said. He turned to his team, who had appeared behind him. "We need a stretcher, now." They improvised one using a sheet and 2 pieces of wood. Carefully, they moved the woman from the bed to the makeshift stretcher. The husband carried the oxygen tank. Michael and another firefighter carried her out. They were just leaving when Michael's radio crackled. "Michael, where are you? The fire's less than a quarter mile from Pine Valley. You need to get out now. We're leaving. We've got civilians. We need 2 more minutes." "You don't have 2 minutes." Michael looked toward the horizon. He could see the flames, now a wall of orange and red, advancing through the trees. The roar was deafening, the heat intense. Even from that distance, they ran to the vehicles. Michael helped load the woman and her husband into the back of his truck. His team climbed into the others. Michael was about to get in when his radio crackled again. It was a code he knew too well. Asterisk code red, asterisk, a distress call. Someone was trapped and needed immediate help. Michael grabbed the radio. "What's the location?" The voice on the other end was full of static, but he caught the words. "Mountain View Road, Blue Ridge Heritage Resort. Reports say the sprinkler systems failed. Fire surrounding the property. Immediate assistance needed." Michael felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. The resort, Diana's resort, the place he had promised to try to save. He looked back at the woman on the stretcher, her husband holding her hand. The 3 small children huddled in another vehicle, Margaret clutching her cat. Then he looked toward Mountain View Road. It was the opposite direction. If he went there now, he'd have to leave these people, and they would die. But if he didn't go, the resort would burn. And he had promised Diana he would try to save it. Michael stood there for maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like 3 hours. His entire life, his marriage, his sense of duty and honor, all converged in that moment. And then he made his choice. He got into the truck, started the engine, and drove in the opposite direction of the resort. He took the civilians to safety. And as he did, driving through the smoky road with the fire roaring behind him, he listened to the radio. He heard the reports coming in. The Blue Ridge Heritage Resort was burning. The sprinkler systems had failed. The fire consumed the cabins in minutes. The main house collapsed. 50 acres of forest turned to ash. Everything was gone. Michael delivered the civilians to the medical teams in the safety zone. Everyone survived. The bedridden woman was taken to the hospital. Margaret and her cat went to an emergency shelter. The family with the 3 children found relatives in a nearby town. Michael had saved 12 lives that day, but he had lost his wife's property. When he finally called Diana that night, he didn't know what to say. She answered on the first ring. "Michael, are you okay?" "I am." "Diana, I have something to tell you. I know I saw the news. The resort's gone, isn't it?" Michael closed his eyes. "Yes." There was a long silence. Then Diana spoke, her voice so empty it frightened him more than if she had screamed. You promised you'd try to save it." "I couldn't. There were people trapped. I had to make a choice, and you chose strangers instead of our home. Instead of me." "Diana, it wasn't like that. There was a bedridden woman, children. I couldn't let them die, but you could let our home die. Our dreams, our life. Everything my father built." "Diana, please, try to understand." "There's nothing to understand, Michael. You made your choice, and I'll make mine." She hung up. Michael sat there in the dark, still wearing his soot-covered uniform, feeling the world collapse around him. He had saved lives. He had done the right thing. He knew that, but why did it feel like he had lost everything that mattered? This story is only just beginning, and things are going to get even more intense. If you're gripped by this narrative, leave a comment saying what your choice would have been in Michael's place. Would you save strangers or protect the property of the one you love? There's no right answer, and that's what makes this story so powerful. Keep watching, because you haven't seen anything yet. In the weeks following the fire, the entire region was in mourning. The blaze destroyed more than 17,000 acres of forest. 140 structures were lost. 14 people died, most from smoke inhalation. Hundreds were left homeless. Michael was praised as a hero. The governor of Tennessee made a public statement thanking the firefighters who risked their lives. Michael received a Medal of Honor. His photo appeared in the local newspaper. But to him, everything felt hollow, because at home, his marriage was falling apart. Diana returned to the area where the resort had been. Michael went with her. They walked through what remained. It was devastating. The cabins were nothing but piles of charred wood. The main house was an empty shell, the stone walls still standing, but everything inside destroyed. The century-old trees were smoldering black stumps. Diana didn't cry. She just walked in silence, touching the ruins, as if saying goodbye. Michael tried to reach for her, but she pulled away. "I can't look at you right now," she said quietly. "Diana, I'm sorry. I'd do anything to change this, but you can't. And that's the thing, isn't it? You made a choice, and that choice destroyed my life. I saved lives, and destroyed my own." In the days that followed, Diana moved into her sister's house in Knoxville. She said she needed space, time to think. Michael understood, but it hurt like an open wound. He tried to bury himself in work. The fire still wasn't completely out. There were hot spots that needed to be monitored, but his heart wasn't in it. He was exhausted, traumatized, and alone. It was 3 weeks after the fire when Diana called. Michael answered with hope. "Diana, how are you? I need to talk to you. In person, of course. When, tomorrow at my lawyer's office." Michael felt his stomach sink. "Lawyer, Diana, what's going on?" "Just show up, Michael. 11A.M. The address is 420 Church Street, Knoxville." She hung up before he could ask anything else. Michael didn't sleep that night. He knew what was coming. Divorce? It had to be. And he didn't know if he had the strength to fight it. Maybe Diana was right. Maybe he had destroyed their marriage with his choice. Maybe some things couldn't be forgiven. The next day, Michael drove to Knoxville. The law office was in a sleek downtown building. Glass and steel. The kind of place that charged $400 an hour. Michael entered. The receptionist directed him to a conference room on the 3rd floor. When he opened the door, Diana was there. And beside her was a man in a flawless gray suit, slicked back hair, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Michael Hartford." The man extended his hand. "I'm Marcus Trent, Mrs. Hartford's attorney." Michael shook his hand, though everything in him screamed not to. He looked at Diana. She looked different. Thinner, tired eyes. But there was something else too. A hardness that hadn't been there before. "Diana, what's going on?" Marcus Trent answered before she could. "Mr. Hartford, we're here to discuss a legal matter regarding the losses my client suffered in the recent fire." "Losses?" Michael looked between Marcus and Diana. "What are you talking about?" Marcus opened a folder. "My client suffered catastrophic losses due to the fire. The Blue Ridge Heritage Resort, valued at approximately $1.2 million, was completely destroyed. In addition, there was priceless sentimental and historical value." Michael shook his head, confused. "I know that. I was there. But what does that have to do with a legal meeting?" Marcus smiled, that cold smile again. "Mr. Hartford, my client believes you are responsible for those losses." "What? You were a wildfire firefighter on duty. You had a responsibility to protect the properties in the area. You received a specific distress call about the resort, and you chose to ignore it." "I didn't ignore it. There were people in immediate danger. I had to save them first. That was your choice. And that choice resulted in the total destruction of my client's property. Therefore, we're filing a civil lawsuit against you for negligence, dereliction of duty, and emotional damages." Michael felt like he had been hit by a truck. He looked at Diana. "You're suing me." Diana finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "You promised me, Michael. You promised you would try to save the resort if you had the chance. And you didn't try. You chose people you didn't even know over me. I saved lives, and destroyed mine." "Diana, this is insane." "I'm your husband," Marcus interjected. "Actually, Mr. Hartford, my client is also filing for divorce, but that's a separate matter. Today we're focusing on civil liability." Michael stood abruptly. "I'm not staying here to listen to this. Diana, if you want a divorce, fine. I won't fight it. But suing me for doing my job, for saving lives, that's insane." Marcus kept his tone calm. "Mr. Hartford, I suggest you hire an attorney. We'll be filing the suit formally next week. And just so you know, my client is also seeking full compensation for the property value, plus emotional damages, which we estimate at $200,000 additional dollars. In total, we're talking about $1.4 million. Michael looked at Marcus, then at Diana. "You're serious? You're really going to do this?" Diana met his eyes for the first time. "You took everything from me, Michael. Now, I'll have to rebuild my life from scratch, and you're going to help me do it, one way or another." Michael left the conference room feeling numb. He walked aimlessly through the streets of Knoxville, just walking, trying to process what had just happened. His wife was suing him. The woman he loved, who had vowed to spend her life by his side, now saw him as an enemy. He understood her pain. He truly did. Losing the resort had been like losing her father all over again, but to sue him, to blame him for doing his job, for saving lives? Michael didn't have $1.4 million. He didn't even have $50,000 in savings. If Diana won the case, he'd lose everything. His house, his savings, his future. And maybe that was exactly what she wanted. Michael knew he needed help. He found an attorney, a woman named Sarah Chen, specializing in civil defense. When he told her his story, she shook her head slowly. "This is going to be tough. Michael, technically, you had a duty as a firefighter. The question is whether you violated that duty by choosing to save immediate lives instead of protecting property. But there's something you need to know. I did some research on Marcus Trent. He's not just a lawyer. He has a history of buying burned properties for low prices and reselling them to developers. And he's represented Diana before, in the loans she took out. Michael, I think there's more to this story than your wife is telling you. I think Marcus Trent has his own plans for that land, and Diana might be getting manipulated without even realizing it. Michael Hartford sat in Sarah Chen's office, trying to process what he had just heard. The lawyer sat across the table, a folder open before her, full of documents and notes. She was a woman in her 40s, short black hair, thin-rimmed glasses, and a reputation for being relentless in court. Wait, Michael said, leaning forward. You're saying Marcus Trent has a financial interest in Diana's property? That he might be using this lawsuit as a way to get that land? Sarah nodded. It's a possibility. Look, I made a few calls after you told me about the case. Marcus Trent isn't a typical family or civil attorney. He specializes in acquiring distressed properties. In the past 5 years, he's been involved in at least 8 cases where properties were destroyed by natural disasters, fires, floods, or tornadoes. And in all of those cases, somehow, he ended up acquiring the land for a fraction of its market value. How does he do that? He positions himself as a savior, offers legal representation at reduced fees, or even for free, gains the trust of property owners when they're vulnerable and desperate. Then, when insurance claims drag on, or owners can't rebuild due to lack of funds, he comes in with a purchase offer. Usually it's low, but for someone desperate, it feels like a lifeline. And you think he's doing that with Diana? Sarah opened a document. Look at this. I got the public records for the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort property. Diana has 2 outstanding loans, one from the First National Bank of Asheville for $50,000, and another from a private lender named Richard Dalton for $80,000. Both are past due. The bank has already started foreclosure proceedings. Michael felt his stomach tighten. He knew about the loans, but didn't know they were overdue. Diana had never mentioned it. There's more, Sarah continued. Richard Dalton isn't just a private lender. He's a business partner of Marcus Trent. They co-own a real estate investment company called Trent Dalton Properties LLC. In the last 3 years, that company has bought 6 properties in natural disaster zones and resold all of them to developers for huge profits. Michael rubbed his face with his hands. So you're saying Diana is being manipulated? That Marcus is using the lawsuit against me as leverage to pressure her into selling the land to him? It's a theory. Think about it. If he can make you responsible for the resort's destruction, Diana could get a payout from you. But meanwhile, she still has the debts. The burned land alone isn't worth much, now maybe $200,000 or $300,000. Not enough to pay off the loans and rebuild. Then Marcus shows up with an offer. He buys the land for $300,000, Diana pays off her debts, keeps maybe $150,000, and thinks she escaped an impossible situation. But then Marcus resells that land to a developer for $1 million or more. He pockets $700,000 in profit, and Diana ends up with nothing, Michael said bitterly. No resort, no land, just enough to start over somewhere far from her roots. Exactly, Sarah closed the folder. Michael, I need to ask you something important. Do you still love your wife? The question caught Michael off guard. He was silent for a moment, looking out the office window. Outside, Knoxville was busy, people rushing by, cars passing, life going on while his was falling apart. Yes, he finally said. I still love her, even after all this. She's hurt, acting out of pain. I understand that. But yes, I still love her. Then we have 2 goals here. First, to defend you against this absurd lawsuit, and second, to open Diana's eyes to what Marcus is really doing. But it won't be easy. She trusts him now, and she's angry at you. How do we do that? Sarah smiled for the first time. By doing exactly what Marcus doesn't expect. We investigate him, and we expose everything in court. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and her team worked like detectives. They traced all of Marcus Trent's previous deals, interviewed people who had sold properties to him. They found a clear pattern of manipulation and exploitation. A woman named Patricia Moore had lost her home in a flood 2 years earlier. Marcus represented her in a lawsuit against the city for inadequate drainage systems. He won the case, and Patricia received $100,000. But then, unable to rebuild her home with that amount and still owing money to the bank, she sold the property to Marcus for $60,000. 6 months later, Marcus resold that same property to a developer for $220,000. A man named Robert Chen lost his restaurant in an electrical fire. Marcus represented him against the power company. The case was settled out of court for $80,000. Robert sold the burned property to Marcus for $40,000, thinking he was making a good deal. Marcus resold it for $150,000 3 months later. The pattern was always the same. Marcus approached people at their most vulnerable, gained their trust, solved their immediate legal issues, but left them in financial situations where selling to him seemed like the only option. Then he profited enormously. While Sarah built the defense case, Michael tried to live his life, but it was impossible. News of the lawsuit spread through the community. Some supported Michael, saying he was a hero who had saved lives. Others believed he should have protected his wife's property. Opinions were divided. Captain Reeves called Michael into his office. "Look, Michael, you know I support you. You did the right thing that day, but this situation is creating problems. The media is talking about it. The department's getting questions. I need you to take a leave until this is resolved. You're suspending me, I'm protecting you. And the department, it's temporary. When this is over, you'll come back. But for now, it's best you stay out of the spotlight." Michael understood, but it still hurt. His job was all he had left now. Without Diana, without his home which he'd put up for sale to pay legal costs, without anything but uncertainty. And now he didn't even have his work. He spent his days preparing for trial with Sarah. They reviewed every detail of that day, every decision Michael made, every life he saved. Sarah brought in the people Michael had rescued: the bedridden woman, Margaret with her cat, the family with 3 kids. All agreed to testify for Michael, but the key part of the defense would be exposing Marcus Trent. And to do that, they needed solid proof that he was manipulating Diana. 3 weeks before trial, the opportunity appeared. Sarah got a call from a private investigator she had hired. "We have something, you need to see this." Sarah and Michael met the investigator, a woman named Linda Kowalski, in a quiet cafe. Linda placed an envelope on the table. "I've been following Marcus Trent, watching his meetings, his movements, and yesterday, I saw him meet with a man named David Brennan. Do you know that name?" Sarah shook her head. "Should I?" David Brennan is a real estate developer from Nashville. He specializes in building luxury resorts in mountain areas. And yesterday, he and Marcus spent 3 hours together looking at blueprints and maps. Linda opened the envelope and pulled out photographs. "I got these shots through the window of Marcus's office. Look at this." The photos showed Marcus and David Brennan leaning over a table, examining documents. But they weren't just any documents. They were topographic maps, and Michael recognized the area immediately. It was the land of the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort. "That's a development plan," said Sarah, looking closer. "They're already planning what to build on that land, before Diana has even decided to sell it." Linda nodded. "There's more. I got hold of some documents. Marcus and David already have a preliminary agreement. If Marcus gets that property for less than $400,000, David will buy it from him for $1.2 million. They'll split the profit. Marcus is about to make $400,000 off this scheme." Michael felt anger boiling inside him. He's using Diana's pain to get rich. She doesn't even know she's being used. "Now we have to prove it in court," said Sarah, "and we have to make Diana see the truth before it's too late." The trial was set for the first Monday in December. It was a cold morning. Gray sky, threatening snow. Michael put on his best suit, the same one he'd worn at his wedding 5 years earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. Sarah met him on the courthouse steps. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, stay calm. No matter what Marcus says, no matter how he tries to provoke you, keep your composure. Let me do the work." They entered the courtroom. The room was packed. Journalists in the front rows, members of the community, some of the firefighters Michael had worked with. And there, at the plaintiff's table, was Diana. Michael hadn't seen her in person since that day at Marcus's office. She was even thinner now, her face a mask of cold determination. She looked at him for a moment, then looked away. Marcus Trent sat beside her, whispering something in her ear. He was immaculate as always: black suit, red tie, the picture of confidence. The judge entered. A woman in her 60s, gray hair in a bun, stern expression. Judge Eleanor Morrison, known for being fair but firm. "This court is now in session. Hartford versus Hartford." The judge struck the gavel. "You may begin with opening statements." Marcus Trent stood. He walked to the jury with the poise of an actor on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a story of broken promises and abandoned responsibilities. Michael Hartford was a Wildfire firefighter, a man trained to protect lives and property. On the day of the fire, he had a clear choice. He had promised his wife Diana Hartford that he would do everything in his power to protect her family's resort. But when the moment came when he received the call that the resort was in danger, he turned his back. He chose to help strangers and let his wife's property burn to the ground. Diana lost everything: her home, her livelihood, her family's legacy, and all because the man who was supposed to protect her chose not to. Today, we ask for justice. We ask for compensation for the immeasurable damage Michael Hartford caused." Marcus returned to his seat. The room was silent. Sarah Chen stood. She lacked Marcus's theatrics. Her approach was straightforward, sincere. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a story about heroism, about a man who had to make the hardest choice of his life. Michael Hartford is not the villain Mr. Trent wants you to believe he is. He is a hero. On the day of the fire, he saved 12 lives: a bedridden woman who couldn't walk, a family with 3 small children, an elderly woman with her cat. All of these people would be dead if Michael hadn't chosen to save them. Yes, the resort burned, and that's a tragedy. But properties can be rebuilt. Lives cannot. Michael did what any decent person would do. He chose people over things. And today, we will prove not only that he is not guilty of negligence, but that there are forces behind this lawsuit that have nothing to do with justice and everything to do with greed. Marcus quickly stood. Objection, Your Honor. The counsel is making baseless accusations. The judge looked at Sarah. Ms. Chen, do you have evidence to support those claims? I do, Your Honor, and I will present them at the appropriate time. Then reserve your accusations until you have proof. Continue. Sarah nodded and returned to her seat. The trial began with Diana's testimony. Marcus called her first. She took the stand, was sworn in, and sat down. Her hands trembled slightly. Marcus began with gentle questions. Mrs. Hartford, can you tell us about the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort? Diana took a deep breath. It was my family's property for 3 generations. My grandfather built the first cabins in 1924. My father took over in the 70s and turned it into a respected tourist destination. When he died, he left me the resort. It was everything to me. It wasn't just a business. It was my story, my identity, my connection to my father and grandfather. And on the day of the fire, did you speak with your husband, Michael Hartford? Yes. He called me in the morning, telling me I needed to evacuate. I was worried about the resort, but he assured me he would do everything in his power to protect it if possible. He promised me. Did he keep that promise? Diana looked directly at Michael. Her voice was cold. No, he didn't. What did you feel when you learned the resort had burned down? Diana closed her eyes. It was like losing my father all over again. It was as if everything he had built, everything he stood for, had turned to ashes. And knowing that my own husband could have prevented it, but chose not to, was a betrayal I can't even describe. Marcus let the silence hang in the room for a moment. No further questions. Sarah stood up for cross-examination. Mrs. Hartford, is it true that the resort was facing financial difficulties? Diana hesitated. Yes, the economy wasn't good. Tourism had declined. And you had taken out loans to keep the place running? Yes, 2 loans, correct? One from First National Bank and another from Richard Dalton. Yes. Did you know that Richard Dalton is a business partner of Mr. Marcus Trent? Diana blinked. What? No, I didn't know that. Marcus stood up. Objection. Irrelevant. Your Honor, it's highly relevant, said Sarah. It will become clear soon. I'll allow it. Continue, Miss Chen. Sarah turned back to Diana. Mrs. Hartford, when you approached Mr. Trent to represent you, did he charge his full fee? Diana shook her head. No, he said he'd work for a reduced fee because my situation was difficult. He was very kind. And did he mention that he might be interested in buying the burned property from you? Not directly, but he mentioned he knew people who could help if I decided to sell. Sarah nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Hartford. No further questions for now. Diana stepped down from the stand, looking confused. She glanced at Marcus, but he was busy with his papers. The next days of the trial were a parade of witnesses. Marcus brought in fire experts who argued that Michael could have tried to protect the resort without endangering lives. He brought in appraisers who confirmed the value of the lost property. He built a case that Michael had been negligent. But Sarah struck back hard. She brought the people Michael had saved. The bedridden woman, now recovered, told how Michael and his team carried her out of the house while the fire was less than 100 meters away. Margaret, the elderly lady, cried as she described how Michael helped her save her cat, the last link she had to her late husband. The family with 3 children testified that without Michael, they would have died that day. Each testimony was powerful. Each painted Michael as a hero, not a villain. But the turning point came on the 4th day of the trial. Sarah called her surprise witness, David Brennan, the real estate developer. Marcus turned pale when he saw David enter the courtroom. He turned to his assistant and whispered something urgently. David Brennan was sworn in and sat down. Sarah began softly. Mr. Brennan, what is your profession? I'm a real estate developer, specializing in luxury resorts in mountain areas. And do you know Marcus Trent? David hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I do. Have you done business together? Yes. A few times. Have you had any conversations about the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort property? Marcus jumped up quickly. Objection. This line of questioning is irrelevant to the case. Your Honor, it's extremely relevant, said Sarah. I'm about to prove there's a fundamental conflict of interest in this case. The judge looked at Marcus, then at Sarah. I'll allow it, but get to the point quickly, Ms. Chen. Sarah turned back to David. Please answer. Did you have conversations with Marcus Trent about the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort property? David looked at Marcus, then back at Sarah. Yes, we had conversations. About what? About the possibility of me buying that property and developing a luxury resort there. And when did these conversations take place? David cleared his throat. Approximately 3 weeks after the fire. Marcus contacted me saying he might have access to a premium property for a very good price. Sarah picked up documents from her table. Your Honor, I'd like to submit as defense exhibits 12 through 15. These are development blueprints, preliminary agreements, and emails between Marcus, Trent, and David Brennan, all dated before this trial began. The judge reviewed the documents. admitted into evidence. Sarah showed the documents to the jury. These are plans for a $20 million luxury resort to be built exactly where the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort once stood. These plans were commissioned and paid for by Marcus Trent. This preliminary agreement shows that David Brennan agreed to buy the property for $1.2 million, provided Marcus could acquire it for less than $400,000. They planned to split the $800,000 profit. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Diana stood up, her face pale. She looked at Marcus. "What is this? You said you were helping me." Marcus tried to stay composed. "Diana, I can explain. It's just business. It doesn't change the fact that you deserve compensation." "Doesn't change," Diana shouted. "You were planning to buy my property for nothing and resell it for millions. You were using me." The judge banged the gavel. "Order, order in the court." But Diana wouldn't calm down. She pointed at Marcus. "You told me Michael was the villain, that he destroyed my life. But it was you all along. You were manipulating everything." Marcus tried to reach for her, but Diana pulled away. She looked around the courtroom, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. Then her eyes met Michael's. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, and Michael saw something break inside her. He saw the moment when all the anger, all the pain she had directed at him, suddenly found its true target. Diana turned to the judge. "I'd like to withdraw the lawsuit." Immediately, Marcus tried to intervene. "Diana, don't be hasty. We can still win this." "Shut up." Diana stepped away from him. "You're no longer my lawyer. I want you out of my life. And I want to withdraw the lawsuit against my husband." The judge looked at Marcus. "Mr. Trent, do you have anything to say?" Marcus knew he was finished. He gathered his papers quickly. "I request permission to withdraw from the case." "Your Honor, granted. And Mr. Trent, I expect the ethics board will hear about your behavior here today." Marcus left the courtroom quickly, chased by journalists shouting questions. The judge turned to Diana. "Mrs. Hartford, are you sure you wish to withdraw the lawsuit?" Diana nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Your Honor. I made a terrible mistake. My husband isn't the villain. He never was." The judge struck the gavel. "Case dismissed. Mr. Hartford, you are free to go." The courtroom erupted in applause. The people Michael had saved surrounded him, hugging him, thanking him again. Sarah smiled, satisfied with the victory. But Michael had eyes for only one person. He made his way through the crowd to Diana. She stood alone, arms crossed, looking lost and small. "Diana," he said softly. She looked at him, eyes red from crying. "Michael, I'm so sorry. I was such a fool. I let my pain blind me. I blamed you for something that was never your fault. You saved lives. You did the right thing, and I attacked you for it." Michael took a step toward her. "You were hurt. You lost something precious. I understand, but I almost destroyed you. I almost took everything from you. How can you forgive me?" Michael took her hand. "Because I love you, and because people make mistakes when they're in pain. What matters is that you saw the truth in time." Diana collapsed into his arms, sobbing. Michael held her, feeling his own tears start to fall. The courtroom slowly emptied around them, but they stayed there, just holding on to each other, beginning the long process of healing. In the weeks that followed, much happened. Marcus Trent was investigated by the ethics board and had his license suspended for 2 years. Richard Dalton was investigated for predatory lending practices. The deal with David Brennan fell apart. Diana sold the burned property, but this time to a legitimate buyer who paid a fair price, $600,000. With that money, she paid off all her debts and still had $200,000 left. It wasn't enough to rebuild the resort, but it was enough to start over. Michael returned to work. Captain Reeves welcomed him back with a firm handshake and a grin. "Missed you, man. This place isn't the same without you." Diana and Michael began couples therapy. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of pain, a lot of trust to rebuild. But slowly, session by session, conversation by conversation, they found their way back to each other. One spring evening, 6 months after the trial, they drove back to the area where the resort had stood. The forest was beginning to recover. Small green shoots sprouted from the charred earth. Life was returning. Diana held Michael's hand as they walked the grounds. "I spent so much time clinging to the past, I almost destroyed our future." Michael squeezed her hand. "The past matters. Your father, your grandfather, everything they built that will always be part of you, but it can't be everything. I know that now." Diana stopped and looked around. "You know, I thought losing this place would be the end, but it wasn't. It was a beginning. A rebirth. What do you want to do now?" Diana smiled. And for the first time in months, Michael saw that genuine smile again. "I don't know yet, but whatever it is, we'll do it together. No more secrets, no more lies, no more letting pain tear us apart." Michael pulled her into a hug. Together, always. They stood there as the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows over the scarred land. The fire had taken so much from them, but it had also revealed truths that needed to be seen. It had burned away the lies, the manipulation, the illusions, and from the scorched ground, something new was growing. Not a resort, not a physical legacy, but something stronger. A marriage tempered by fire. A love that had endured the hardest test and survived. As they walked back to the car, Diana stopped once more. Michael, can I ask you something? Of course. That day, when you had to choose between coming to the resort and saving those people, how long did it take you to decide? Michael thought for a moment, maybe 3 seconds. Diana nodded slowly. And do you regret it? Michael looked into her eyes. Every day, not because it was the wrong choice, but because I know how much it hurt you. If I could have saved everyone, I would have, but I couldn't, and I chose to save lives. I'll always choose to save lives. I know, and that's why I love you. That's why I'll always love you, because you're the kind of man who makes the right choice, even when it's the hardest one, even when it costs everything. They kissed there, on the burned ground where a family empire had fallen, where a marriage had nearly ended, where the truth was finally revealed. And in that kiss, there was forgiveness, promise, and hope. The future was uncertain. They didn't know where life would take them, but they knew one thing. They would face it together. No matter what came, fires or storms, losses or triumphs, they would stand side by side, because in the end, properties burn, buildings collapse, fortunes are lost. But love, true love forged through fire and pain, that kind of love cannot be destroyed. It only grows stronger. And as they drove home that night, with the mountains slowly healing around them, Michael and Diana Hartford knew they had found something no fire could ever take away. They had found the true definition of home, not a place, but a person, each other. 6 months had passed since the trial. Summer had arrived in the Great Smoky Mountains, bringing with it tourists, warmth, and the promise of new beginnings. Michael Hartford was back at work full-time, and his reputation as a hero had solidified in the community. But for him, the real work wasn't in the mountains. It was at home, rebuilding his marriage with Diana. Couples therapy was helping, but it was a slow process. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, their therapist, was a woman in her 50s with gray hair, in a gentle but direct manner. She didn't let either Michael or Diana escape hard conversations. In one particularly intense session in July, Dr. Reynolds leaned forward in her chair. Diana, you said you forgave Michael for the choice he made, but forgiving and truly letting go are different things. Have you let go? Diana sat on the couch beside Michael, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked down. I'm trying. I really am. But sometimes, when I drive past where the resort used to be, or when I see old photographs, the pain comes back. And for a moment, I wonder if things could have been different. Michael squeezed her hand. I wonder that too. Every day. Dr. Reynolds nodded. That's normal. You both went through trauma, and trauma doesn't disappear just because you decided to forgive. It has to be processed. Diana, you lost more than a building. You lost a tangible connection to your father. And Michael, you carry the guilt of not being able to save everything. You both have scars. The question is, will you let those scars define you, or will you use them as reminders that you survived? There was silence in the room. Then Diana spoke, her voice almost a whisper. I want to survive. I want more than to survive. I want to thrive. But I don't know how to do that when I feel like part of me is still trapped in those ashes. Then maybe it's time for you to go back, said Dr. Reynolds. Not physically, you've already done that, but emotionally, it's time for you to make peace with that place, to truly say goodbye. Diana looked at Michael. He nodded encouragingly. We can do it together, if you want. That night, they drove to the land where the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort had once stood. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The forest had recovered remarkably. Where once there had been only blackened earth and dead trees, there was now green vegetation, wildflowers, and even a few deer grazing in the distance. Diana stepped out of the car slowly. She walked to where the main house had stood. The stone foundations were still there, covered in moss and vines. She knelt down and touched the stones. My grandfather laid each of these stones with his own hands, she said. It took 3 years to build the main house. 3 years of hard work, sweat, and love, and it burned down in less than an hour. Michael knelt beside her. But the stones are still here. The foundation remains. Maybe that means something. Diana looked at him. What do you mean? That what your grandfather built, what your father protected, wasn't really about the buildings. It was about family. It was about creating a place where people felt welcome, where memories were made. And you can still do that, Diana. Maybe not here, maybe not in the same way, but the essence of what they built lives in you. Diana felt tears run down her face. How do I do that? How do I rebuild something when I don't even know where to start? You start small, one step at a time, and you don't do it alone. You have me, and you have $200,000. That's more than a lot of people have to start with. Diana wiped her tears. You're right. I've been so focused on what I lost that I forgot what I still have. She stood and looked around the land. The property was still hers, though she had sold the resort portion to pay off the debts. She had kept 5 acres around the main house. It was enough. Michael, she said suddenly, what do you think about building something new here? Michael blinked. You want to rebuild the resort? Not the resort? Something different, smaller, more manageable. Maybe a few cabins for short-term rentals. A small event space. Nothing grand like before, but something ours. Something we build together, Michael smiled. I'd love that. That night, they sat at the kitchen table in their rented house and began planning. Diana sketched rough cabin designs. Michael calculated construction costs. They talked about design, sustainability, creating a place that honored the past but looked to the future. With $200,000, they couldn't build much, but they could build enough to start. 2 cabins to begin with, maybe 3, a small event pavilion. Simple but beautiful landscaping. They'd do much of the work themselves to save money. Let's call it Phoenix Ridge, Diana said suddenly. Michael looked at her. Phoenix Ridge, like the bird that rises from the ashes. That's what we're doing, isn't it? Rising again. Michael took her hand across the table. It's perfect. The next months were intense. Michael got a 3-month leave from work to focus on the project. They hired a small local contractor named Tom Brady, a 60-year-old man who had known Diana's father and was moved by the idea of helping rebuild. Construction began in September. They cleared the land carefully, preserving as much of the recovered vegetation as possible. The stone foundations of the original house were incorporated into the new design, an open pavilion with a wooden roof and panoramic mountain views. Diana was there every day, working alongside the builders. She learned to use tools, to mix cement, to lay wooden boards. Her hands became calloused, her skin tanned, but she had never been happier. Michael watched her work and fell in love with her all over again. This was a different Diana from the woman he had known, stronger, more resilient, more self-aware. One afternoon, while they were working on the first cabin, Diana stopped and looked at Michael. You know, I spent so much time angry at you, blaming you, but now I realize you gave me a gift. Michael stopped hammering. A gift? Losing everything. No, you forced me to let go. I was so attached to the past, so trapped in my father's memory, that I couldn't live my own life. The fire, as terrible as it was, freed me. It forced me to discover who I am beyond that resort, and I never would have done that if I hadn't lost everything. You would have found your way eventually. Diana shook her head. No, I wouldn't have. I would have clung to that place until it completely consumed me, until I was broke and bitter and alone. The fire saved me from myself. Michael pulled her into a hug. You're the strongest person I know. I wasn't, but I'm becoming one. In November, the first cabin was finished. It was small, just 1 bedroom with a bathroom and a tiny kitchen, but it was beautiful. Reclaimed wood walls, large windows overlooking the mountains, a stone fireplace built with the original stones from the main house. Diana posted photos on social media. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People who remembered the old resort left emotional comments. People who had heard about Michael and Diana's story wanted to support. In 3 days, the cabin was booked for the next 6 months. This is incredible, said Michael, looking at the computer screen. People really care. It's not just about the cabin, said Diana. It's about the story. People love stories of rebirth, of overcoming adversity. We represent that. By December, the second cabin was almost finished. The event pavilion was under construction, and Diana had a surprise for Michael. It was Christmas Eve. They were on the property, admiring the work they had done. Snow was beginning to fall, covering everything with a soft white blanket. Michael, said Diana, I have something for you. She handed him an envelope. He opened it and found a legal document. It was property papers. Phoenix Ridge was now registered under both their names. 50% Michael Hartford, 50% Diana Hartford. Diana, I can't accept this. This is your project. No, it's our project. You worked as hard as I did. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. This is as much yours as it is mine. Michael looked at the document, then at Diana. Tears filled his eyes. Thank you for everything, for forgiving me a second chance. It's not a second chance, Michael. It's a new beginning, for both of us. They kissed as the snow fell around them, transforming the world into something magical and new. But not everything was perfect. In January, they received news that shook them. Richard Dalton, the lender who had loaned Diana money, was suing her. He claimed Diana still owed him money, interest, and penalties amounting to nearly $40,000. Diana was furious. I paid him everything I owed. I have the receipts. Sarah Chen, who had remained friends with Michael and Diana after the trial, reviewed the documents. There's a clause here you might have missed. Dalton included an early repayment fee. You paid off the loan before the agreed term, so technically, he can charge that fee, but that's absurd, said Michael. $40,000. That will destroy everything we've built. Sarah shook her head. Not necessarily. That clause is extremely predatory. I can argue it's illegal, but it'll take time and money. How much time? Maybe 6 months, maybe more. Diana sank into her chair. We don't have 6 months. We barely have enough to finish the third cabin. If we have to spend on lawyers again, it'll wipe out our reserves. Michael looked at Sarah. Is there another option? Sarah hesitated. You could try to negotiate, offer Dalton a settlement. Maybe $15,000 or $20,000 to make him go away. That's still a lot of money we don't have. I know, but it's better than $40,000. And better than months of legal battle. Michael and Diana exchanged looks. They were tired of fighting, tired of lawsuits, tired of people trying to take advantage of them. Let's try to negotiate, said Diana finally. But no more than $15,000. We don't have more to give. Sarah scheduled a meeting with Richard Dalton and his lawyer. It was tense from the start. Dalton was a man in his 50s, bald, with cold eyes and a smile that seemed more like a threat than a greeting. "Mrs. Hartford," he said, sitting down. "I heard you're building something new on the property. Congratulations. But that doesn't change the fact that you owe me money." "I paid my loan," said Diana firmly, "in full. But you violated the terms by paying early. The clause is clear. $40,000. "That clause is predatory and likely illegal," said Sarah. "My client is willing to offer $15,000 as a good faith settlement, but that's it. Take it or leave it." Dalton laughed. "$15,000? You're joking. I want 40, and I'll get it. In court, if necessary." "Then we'll see you in court," said Michael, standing. "We'll expose every dirty deal you've ever made, every person you've exploited, just like we did with Marcus Trent." Dalton stopped smiling. "Are you threatening me?" "No, I'm promising you. You want to turn this into a public fight? We're ready. And this time, people already know us. They know our story. You think you'll win public sympathy by trying to squeeze more money out of us?" Dalton looked between Michael and Diana. He clearly hadn't expected resistance. "$25,000, my final offer." "$15,000, said Diana. "And you sign an agreement saying you'll never bother us again. Never contact us again. Ever." Dalton considered for a long moment. Then he nodded. "$20,000, and we have a deal." Diana looked at Michael. He nodded. "$20,000, said Diana. "But you sign. Now. Today. And you accept payment in installments over 6 months." Dalton sighed. "Fine. We have a deal." The papers were signed. Dalton left the office. Diana collapsed into her chair, exhausted. "We just committed to another $20,000 we barely have. But it's over," said Michael. "He's out of our lives. And we'll find the money, we always do." And they did. It wasn't easy. They worked longer hours. Diana took a part-time job as a hospitality consultant for other small businesses. Michael worked overtime whenever possible. They stretched every dollar, ate simple meals, cut every non-essential expense. But every month they made the payment to Dalton. And every month, Phoenix Ridge grew a little more. The third cabin was finished in March. The event pavilion opened in April with a small celebration that brought people from all over the region. Margaret, the elderly lady Michael had rescued with her cat, was there. The family with 3 children was there. The woman who had been bedridden was there, now walking with a cane but smiling broadly. They had all come to celebrate not just Phoenix Ridge, but the incredible journey Michael and Diana had taken. Captain Reeves made a toast. "To Michael and Diana Hartford, 2 of the most resilient people I've ever met. You've faced both literal and metaphorical fire, and not only survived, you thrived. You're an inspiration to us all." Everyone raised their glasses. Michael looked around, seeing the faces of people whose lives he had touched, people who were now part of his extended family, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. "Peace." Diana squeezed his hand. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did. We're not done yet," said Michael with a smile. "We still have 3 payments left at Dalton. We still have plenty of work ahead." "I know, but look how far we've come. A year ago, I was suing you. Our marriage was over. I had lost everything. And now look where we are." Michael pulled her close. "We're exactly where we're meant to be." As the party continued around them, Michael and Diana stepped away, walking to the edge of the property where they could see the mountains stretching to the horizon. The sun was setting, painting everything in golden hues. "My father would be proud," she said softly, "not of the original resort, but of this, of what we built together." "He'd be proud of you," said Michael, "of your strength, your courage, and of you too, for saving me. Not just that day of the fire, but every day since." They stood there as night fell, to people who had been broken and rebuilt together. The road hadn't been easy. It still wasn't, but they had learned that the best paths rarely are. And that true love isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up. Together, Phoenix Ridge wasn't the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort. It never would be, but it was something better. A testament to resilience, forgiveness, and love that survives even when everything around is burning. Proof that from the darkest ashes, something beautiful can grow. And as the stars began to appear in the sky above the Great Smoky Mountains, Michael and Diana Hartford knew their story was far from over, but the hardest chapters were behind them. What came next would be written by them together, 1 page at a time, and it would be a story worth telling. Summer returned to the mountains, bringing with it the intense heat and the busiest tourist season Phoenix Ridge had experienced since its opening. The 3 cabins were booked months in advance. The event pavilion hosted weddings almost every weekend. Diana had hired 2 part-time employees to help with maintenance and guest services. Financially, things were finally stabilizing. They made the last payment to Richard Dalton in June, and for the first time in over a year, they were debt-free. Michael had returned to full-time work as a Wildfire firefighter, but continued helping with Phoenix Ridge in his spare time and on weekends. But success brought new challenges. In July, during a city council meeting in Asheville, a developer named Gregory Walsh presented a proposal to build a massive luxury resort less than 2 miles from Phoenix Ridge. The project was enormous. 200 hotel units, 3 restaurants, a spa, and an 18-hole golf course. Diana was at the meeting when she saw the plans. Her stomach tightened. A resort that size would bring heavy traffic, noise, and light pollution, and could potentially pull all the customers away from Phoenix Ridge. They couldn't compete. She raised her hand during the public comment period. Diana Hartford, owner of Phoenix Ridge. I have serious concerns about this project. The environmental impact on an area still recovering from devastating fires would be significant. Moreover, local infrastructure isn't prepared for this level of development. Gregory Walsh, a man in his 40s with perfectly combed blonde hair and a suit that probably cost more than Diana's car, replied with a condescending smile, Mrs. Hartford, I understand your concerns, but this project will bring jobs, tax revenue, and tourism to the region. Our environmental studies show minimal impact. And as for infrastructure, we're willing to fund improvements to roads and water systems. But the character of the region will change completely, argued Diana. People come here for nature, for peace. A resort that size will destroy exactly what makes this place special. Progress requires change. Mrs. Hartford, I'm sure you understand that. The meeting ended with the council voting to move the proposal forward for more detailed review. Diana left feeling defeated. When she told Michael that night, he was equally worried. This could end Phoenix Ridge before we even fully take off. Maybe it's time to sell, said Diana quietly, while we still have value. Before Walsh's resort is built and our place becomes irrelevant. Michael looked at her, shocked. Are you serious? After everything we've been through, you want to give up like that? It's not giving up, it's being practical. We've built something beautiful here, but maybe we can't compete with million-dollar corporations. Diana, you taught me that not everything is about money, it's about heart, about authenticity. Phoenix Ridge has something Walsh's resort will never have, soul. Diana wanted to believe him, but the fear was real. They had invested everything into Phoenix Ridge. If it failed, they'd lose everything again. The next few days were tense. Diana researched Gregory Walsh and his development history. What she found was disturbing. Walsh had a reputation for promising minimal impact and then failing to deliver. In Colorado, one of his resorts had polluted a local river. In Montana, another project had displaced an entire community of small homeowners. Diana compiled her findings and shared them with local environmental groups. One organization, the Mountain Heritage Coalition, took interest. Its leader, a woman named Janet Morrison, set up a meeting with Diana. We've had our eye on Gregory Walsh for years, said Janet. He's an environmental disaster waiting to happen. But he has expensive lawyers and political connections. It'll be hard to stop him. But not impossible, asked Diana. Not impossible. We need to build a strong case. Environmental impact, community concerns, code violations, and we need public support. Lots of it. Diana nodded. What can I do? Keep speaking out. At council meetings, on social media, with local papers. Tell your story. Show people what's at stake. Diana began a campaign. She wrote opinion pieces for the local paper, posted on social media about the importance of preserving the mountain's character, organized a petition that quickly gathered over 2,000 signatures. Michael supported her completely but began to worry. Diana was consumed by the fight. She worked late every night, tree searching, writing, planning. She barely slept, barely ate. Diana, you need to slow down, he said one night. This is consuming you. I can't slow down. We have to fight this, but not at the cost of your health. Not at the cost of our marriage. Diana stopped and looked at him. You think I'm putting this ahead of us? I think you're letting fear control you again, just like with the old resort. You're so terrified of losing Phoenix Ridge that you can't see anything else. Michael's words hit like a slap. Diana felt tears sting her eyes. That's not fair, isn't it? Diana, I love you, but I recognize this pattern. You cling to something so tightly you forget to live. We built Phoenix Ridge together, but if we lose you in the process, what's the point? Diana collapsed into a chair. You're right. I know you're right. But I'm so scared. Scared of losing everything again. Michael knelt beside her. Then let me remind you of something. Last time, you thought losing the resort meant losing everything. But it didn't. You had me. You had yourself. And you rebuilt. If we have to do it again, we will. But we won't if you destroy yourself in the process. Diana wiped her tears. Okay, you're right. I'll slow down, but I'm not giving up the fight. I'm not asking you to give up. I'm asking for balance. In the following weeks, Diana found that balance. She continued her campaign but set boundaries. No more work after 9 p.m. weekends were for her and Michael, not the fight against Walsh. And surprisingly, she became more effective, not less. The campaign gained momentum. The Mountain Heritage Coalition organized a rally in August. Over 500 people showed up, holding signs, chanting, demanding that the city council reconsider Walsh's project. Diana spoke at the rally. Her voice echoed through a megaphone. We're not against development. We're against irresponsible development. Gregory Walsh wants to build an empire of profit at the expense of our community, our environment, our way of life. And we won't allow it. The crowd cheered. News cameras captured everything. The story spread to state and then national news. Suddenly, Diana's small-town fight against a big developer became a national story about communities standing up to corporate interests. Gregory Walsh didn't like the attention. He gave interviews trying to paint Diana as a NIMBY, someone who wanted progress as long as it wasn't in her backyard. He called the protesters environmental extremists who didn't understand economics, but the narrative wasn't working. People saw Diana and Michael as local heroes, the couple who had lost everything in a fire, rebuilt from the ashes, and were now fighting to protect their community. It was a powerful story. In September, the Mountain Heritage Coalition presented an independent environmental report to the City Council. The report highlighted significant risks that Walsh's study had minimized or ignored entirely: potential groundwater contamination, increased erosion risk, and impact on endangered species. The council meeting was packed. Diana and Michael sat in the front row. Gregory Walsh sat across the aisle, surrounded by his team of lawyers. Council President Robert Chen opened the meeting. "We've heard many opinions on this proposal, a lot of passion on both sides. But in the end, we must base our decision on facts. And the facts in the independent report raise legitimate concerns." One council member, a woman named Sandra Phillips, spoke next. "I grew up in these mountains. I've seen development come and go, some good, some bad, and I've learned that when you build too fast, too big, without respect for the land, you always pay the price. I can't support this project as it stands." Another council member agreed, then another. When the vote was held, it was 4-3 against approving Walsh's project. The room erupted in cheers. Diana grabbed Michael's hand, tears streaming down her face. "We won. We really won." Gregory Walsh stormed out, refusing to speak to the press. His lawyers followed close behind. Outside the municipal building, Diana was surrounded by reporters. "How do you feel about this victory?" "Relieved, grateful, but more than that, proud. Proud of a community that stood up and said some things are more important than profit, that our land, our water, our way of life are worth fighting for." What's next for Phoenix Ridge? We keep doing what we do best, offering a place where people can connect with nature, with each other, with something real. We don't need 200 hotel rooms to do that. We just need heart. The victory brought more attention to Phoenix Ridge. Bookings increased. Travel magazines wrote about the place. Diana was invited to speak at conferences on sustainable development and small business resilience. But the attention also brought pressure. With more guests came higher expectations. Diana hired more staff, expanded landscaping, added amenities, and slowly, without realizing it, Phoenix Ridge began to become exactly what Diana had sworn it would never be: a business focused on growth instead of soul. It was Michael who noticed first. In November, after a particularly chaotic weekend with 3 weddings and every cabin booked, he found Diana in her office, staring at spreadsheets and growth projections. "Diana, we need to talk." She looked up, distracted. "About what?" "About this?" He gestured at the papers scattered across her desk. "About what we're becoming. We're becoming successful. Is that bad?" "That depends on what you call success. When was the last time you actually talked to a guest? When was the last time you walked the property just to appreciate it? You're so busy managing growth that you've forgotten why we started this." Diana leaned back in her chair, defensive. "We started this to survive, to rebuild, and that's exactly what we're doing. No, we started this to create something meaningful, something small but special. And now you're talking about building for more cabins, expanding the pavilion, hiring a full-time marketing manager. Diana, you're turning Phoenix Ridge into a smaller version of what we fought to stop. That's not fair, isn't it?" Michael picked up one of the papers. "Here's your projection. You want to double capacity over the next 2 years. You want to turn this into a $500,000 operation. Diana, this isn't about soul anymore. It's about money." The words hit Diana like a punch to the stomach. She looked at the papers on her desk, the projections, the plans. When had this happened? When had she stopped building a dream and started building an empire? "I didn't realize," she said softly. "I just wanted us to have security, to never have to worry about money again." Michael sat beside her. "I understand that. But remember what you told me when we started, that it wasn't about recreating the old resort. It was about creating something new, something ours, something that mattered more than profit." Diana felt tears fill her eyes. "You're right. I lost my way again. Why do I always do that? Because you're afraid. And I understand that fear. But we can't live in fear, Diana. Not after everything we've been through. So what do? We go back to basics. 3 cabins, 1 pavilion, the 2 of us, plus a few employees who truly care. We take fewer bookings, but better ones. Focus on quality, not quantity. We make Phoenix Ridge what it was always meant to be, a refuge, not a business." Diana wiped her tears. "Okay, let's do it." In the days that followed, Diana canceled her expansion plans. She turned down offers from investors who wanted to help her grow faster. She reduced the number of events they accepted per month. And surprisingly, Phoenix Ridge didn't suffer. In fact, it improved. With fewer guests, Diana and Michael could devote more time to each one. They began hosting community dinners where guests gathered, shared stories, and connected. They organized guided mountain hikes, campfire nights with guitars and marshmallows. Phoenix Ridge became exactly what Diana had originally envisioned, a place where people didn't just stay, but belonged, where memories were made, where lives were touched. In December, on the 1-year anniversary of the trial, Diana and Michael hosted a special celebration. They invited everyone who had been part of their journey: Margaret with her cat, the family with 3 children, now a little older, the woman who had once been bedridden, now walking without a cane, Captain Reeves, Sarah Chen, Janet Morrison from the Mountain Heritage Coalition. Everyone gathered in the pavilion as snow fell softly outside. Diana stood to give a toast. "A year ago, I was in a courtroom, suing the man I loved. I was so consumed by pain and anger that I couldn't see the truth right in front of me, that Michael wasn't my enemy. He was my savior, not just on the day of the fire, but every day since." She looked at Michael, her eyes shining with tears. "You taught me that some things matter more than property, that lives matter more than things, that love means making hard choices. And you were right, about everything." Michael stood and joined her. "And you taught me that forgiveness is possible, that people can change, that from the ashes, something beautiful can grow. Phoenix Ridge isn't just a business. It's proof that when you lose everything, when you think you can't go on, you find strength you didn't know you had." He turned to the guests. "All of you were part of this journey. You supported us when we were at our lowest. You believed in us when we barely believed in ourselves. Phoenix Ridge exists because of you, so this toast isn't just for us, it's for all of you. For community, for resilience, for love." Everyone raised their glasses. To Phoenix Ridge, to second chances, to rising from the ashes. As the celebration continued, Michael and Diana stepped out onto the pavilion deck. The snow had stopped, and the sky was clear, full of stars. The mountains stretched around them, silent and majestic. "A year ago, I was standing in a courtroom full of hate," said Diana. "Now I'm here, full of gratitude. It's amazing how life can change." Michael pulled her close. "It didn't change by accident. It changed because you chose it. You chose to forgive, you chose to grow, you chose love. We chose always us. Michael, never forget that." They stood there in the cold, warmed by each other, watching the stars. There would still be challenges ahead. There always would be. But they had learned that challenges weren't walls. They were steps. Each one leading to something higher, stronger, better. Phoenix Ridge was complete now. Not in the sense that there would be no more growth or change, but in the sense that it had found its essence, its purpose. And that purpose wasn't about money or success or competing with big resorts. It was about offering a place where broken people could come and find healing, where families could reconnect, where couples could rediscover why they fell in love, where anyone, no matter how lost, could find a way home. And as Michael and Diana Hartford stood under the stars that December night, they knew they had created something rare, something precious. Not just a business, but a legacy. Not of stone and wood, but of love and resilience and the unshakable belief that no matter how dark it gets, no matter how much you lose, there is always a way to find light. There is always a way to rise from the ashes. And that was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. A lesson they would share with everyone who passed through the doors of Phoenix Ridge. A lesson that, in the end, was the only thing that truly mattered. That love isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up, together. 2 years had passed since that December night. Phoenix Ridge had found its rhythm, its place in the community. The 3 cabins maintained steady occupancy. The pavilion hosted intimate events that truly mattered to people. Diana and Michael had built not just a business, but a reputation as curators of meaningful experiences. It was March, and spring was beginning to awaken in the mountains. Trees were budding with new leaves. Wildflowers dotted the fields. And Diana had news that would change everything. She was pregnant. When she told Michael, he was silent for a long moment. Then he scooped her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at once. "We're having a baby. We're really having a baby." Diana laughed through tears. "I know. I didn't plan it. But it happened. And I'm so happy." Michael, so terrifyingly happy. They told only close family and friends at first. Diana wanted to wait until the 2nd trimester to go public. But the secret was hard to keep when she radiated so much joy. Margaret was one of the first to find out. She had come for a weekend stay, something she did regularly now. When Diana refused wine at the community dinner, Margaret smiled knowingly. "So it's finally happening. You're going to be parents." Diana blinked. "How did you know?" "Darling, I raised 4 children. I recognize that glow. And that refusal of wine. Congratulations, your baby will have the best parents any child could ask for." Diana's pregnancy was smooth, without complications. She kept working, though Michael insisted she rests more. They began turning their small home office into a nursery. Michael assembled the crib. Diana painted the walls a soft yellow. One night, as they worked on the room, Diana stopped and looked at Michael. "Do you think we'll be good parents?" Michael set the brush down. "I think we'll make mistakes. Every parent does. But I know we'll love this child with everything we have. And in the end, that's what matters. I want our child to know the story. The real story. The fire, the trial, everything. I don't want to hide the hard parts." Why? Because those hard parts made us who we are. And I want our child to know that no matter how hard things get, you can always find a way. You can always rebuild. Michael pulled her into a hug. Our child is going to have the wisest mother in the world. In June, Diana went into labor 3 weeks early. It was a warm night, and they were at the pavilion cleaning up after a small wedding. Diana was stacking chairs when she felt the first contraction. Michael, I think it's time. Michael dropped the chair he was carrying now. But we still have 3 weeks. Babies don't follow schedules, said Diana, grimacing as another contraction hit. They rushed to the hospital in Asheville. The 20-minute drive felt like an eternity. Michael held Diana's hand, whispering words of encouragement as he drove faster than he should have. At the hospital, things moved quickly. Diana's contractions were close together. The medical team took her straight to the delivery room. Michael stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, being her anchor through the pain. 8 hours later, at 5:43 a.m., as the sun rose over the mountains, Thomas James Hartford entered the world. 6 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect miracle. Thomas, after Diana's father. James, after Captain Reeves, who had been like a father to Michael. When the nurse placed the baby in Diana's arms, she looked at that tiny wrinkled red face and felt something break open inside her. Not from pain, but from love so fierce it was almost frightening. "Hi, Tommy," she whispered. "We've waited so long for you." Michael stood beside her, tears streaming down his face. He touched Tommy's little hand, and the tiny fingers wrapped around his finger. "He's perfect, completely perfect." The first months with Tommy were challenging. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, the constant fear of doing everything wrong, but they were also the most joyful months of their lives. Every smile from Tommy was a gift. Every milestone, no matter how small, was a celebration. Phoenix Ridge adjusted to the new addition. Diana took 3 months of maternity leave, leaving operations mostly in the hands of Michael and their assistant manager, a young woman named Rebecca who had proven indispensable. When Diana returned to work, she brought Tommy with her. She set up a portable crib in the office. The guests loved it. They'd stop by to see the baby, to hold that little miracle. Tommy became part of the Phoenix Ridge experience. In September, when Tommy was 3 months old, Diana received an unexpected call. It was from a producer of a television show called Rebuilding Lives *, which featured stories of people who had overcome extreme adversity. "Mrs. Hartford, we love your story. The fight against the fire, the lawsuit, the rebuilding, the victory over the developer. It's inspiring. We'd like to feature you and your husband in an episode." Diana hesitated. "I don't know. We're not TV people. We're just living our lives. And that's exactly why your story resonates. You're real, authentic. Think about it. You could inspire thousands of people going through their own struggles." Diana said she'd think about it. When she told Michael, he had the same hesitation. But after talking it through, they realized it might be a chance to share their message more broadly. That forgiveness is possible. That rebuilding is possible. That love can survive even the hardest tests. They agreed to do the show. The film crew arrived in October. They spent a week at Phoenix Ridge, capturing daily life, interviewing Diana and Michael, talking to people in the community. They filmed the land where the old resort had stood, visited the courthouse where the trial had taken place, interviewed Sarah Chen, Captain Reeves, Margaret, and others who had been part of the journey. During one interview, the producer asked Diana, "If you could go back in time, to the day of the fire, what would you say to your younger self?" Diana thought for a long moment. "I'd say to trust. Trust that even when everything is burning, even when you lose everything, it's not the end, it's just a beginning. I'd say that the property you're about to lose isn't what defines you. What defines you is how you respond to that loss. Whether you let it destroy you, or you use it to become stronger." And to Michael, what would you say to him that day? "I'd say thank you, for choosing lives over things, for being the kind of man who does the right thing, even when it's the hardest thing, for loving me enough to forgive my anger, for never giving up on us, even when I gave up." The episode aired in December, exactly 3 years after the trial. Diana and Michael watched it at home with Tommy asleep between them on the couch. Seeing their story told on screen was surreal. The cameras had captured not just the facts, but the emotion, the pain, the struggle, the redemption. When it ended, Michael turned off the TV. They sat in silence for a moment. "How do you feel?" Michael asked. "Exposed, vulnerable, but also free. As if by sharing our story, I can finally let it go completely." The next morning, Diana's phone exploded. Messages poured in from people all over the country who had seen the show. People who had lost everything in natural disasters and found hope in Diana and Michael's story. People struggling in their marriages who were inspired by Diana's forgiveness. People who simply needed to hear that starting over was possible. One message in particular moved Diana deeply. It was from a woman named Patricia who had lost her home in a Florida hurricane. She had blamed her husband, a police officer, for not being home to help protect their property. They were on the brink of divorce. "I watched your episode last night," Patricia wrote, "and I cried through the whole thing. I saw myself in you. I saw my husband in Michael, and I realized I'd been blaming the wrong person all along. I called my husband this morning. We're going to try again. Because of your story, we're going to try again." Diana read the message to Michael. "Do you see this? Our pain, our struggle, is helping other people. Michael hugged her and Tommy. Maybe that was the purpose all along. Not just to survive, but to use our survival to give others hope. In the months that followed, Diana and Michael received dozens of invitations to speak at conferences, churches, community groups. They accepted a few, always taking Tommy with them. Their message was simple but powerful. The fire can take your things, but it can't take your capacity to love, to forgive, to rebuild. In April, they received a special invitation. The National Park Service was organizing a memorial ceremony on the 5th anniversary of the fire that had destroyed the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort. They wanted Diana and Michael to speak. On the day of the ceremony, hundreds gathered. Firefighters who had battled the flames, people who had lost homes, families who had been evacuated, and the people Michael had saved that day. Captain Reeves spoke first, describing the bravery of the firefighters, the horror of the fire, the lives that had been saved. Then he called Michael to the stage. Michael was nervous. He had never been comfortable being the center of attention. But when he looked out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces. Margaret, the family with the children, the woman who had been bedridden, all the people whose lives he had touched. 5 years ago, he began, I made a choice that changed my life forever. I chose to save people instead of protecting property. And that choice cost me almost everything. My marriage, my reputation, my peace. He paused, searching for Diana in the crowd. She was holding Tommy, smiling at him through tears. But it also gave me everything. It gave me clarity about what truly matters. It gave me a marriage stronger than I ever thought possible. It gave me a wife who taught me about forgiveness. It gave me a son who represents every new chance. He looked at the people he had saved, and it gave me you. 12 lives that would have ended that day if I had made a different choice. 12 people who now have families, dreams, futures. That's not a cost, it's a gift. The crowd applauded. Michael stepped down from the stage, and Diana came to him, Tommy in her arms. They stood together as others spoke, bearing witness to the resilience of a community that had faced fire and survived. After the ceremony, they walked to the site where the original resort had stood. The stone foundations were still there, now covered with moss and wildflowers. A plaque had been placed, asterisk in memory of the Blue Ridge Heritage Resort, 1924 to 2020, built with love, lost to fire, remembered forever, asterisk. Diana stood there with Tommy in her arms. She thought of her father, her grandfather, all the generations who had poured their lives into that place, and she felt peace. Hi Dad, she whispered. I wish you could meet your grandson, Thomas James. He has your eyes, he has your smile, and he'll grow up hearing stories about you, about the legacy you built. She turned to Michael, but he'll grow up knowing that legacies aren't made of stone and wood. They're made of love and choices and the courage to start over when everything falls apart. Michael kissed her forehead. Your father would be so proud of you. I know, and I hope he's proud of us. Of everything we've built from the ashes. They stood there as the sun set over the mountains. 3 generations bound by love and loss and the unshakable belief that no matter how dark it gets, light always finds a way. Tommy began to fuss, pulling them back to the present moment. Diana laughed. Okay, little one. It's time to go home. Home. The word meant something different now. It wasn't a place. It was wherever the 3 of them were together. As they drove back to Phoenix Ridge, Diana looked in the rearview mirror one last time at the land where everything had begun and ended and begun again. Then she turned forward, toward the road ahead, toward the future waiting for them. The fire had taken much, but it had also had burned away illusions, scorched away lies, revealed what truly mattered. And from the charred ground, something stronger had grown. Not just Phoenix Ridge, but a family. A purpose, a legacy not of things, but of love. And that was the kind of legacy no fire could destroy. The kind that lasted generations. The kind that changed lives. The kind that proved, again and again, that from the darkest ashes, the brightest flames can rise. Michael, Diana, and Tommy Hartford were living proof of it. And as the mountains turned blue in the twilight around them, they moved forward, together, into whatever new adventure life would bring. Because they had learned the most important lesson of all. It's not about never falling. It's about always getting back up. It's not about never losing. It's about always rebuilding. It's not about avoiding the fire. It's about using the flames to forge something stronger. And that was a lesson they would carry forever. A lesson they would pass on to Tommy. A lesson they would share with everyone who crossed their path. The lesson of Phoenix Ridge. From the ashes, we can always be reborn. And so ends the journey of Michael and Diana Hartford. A story about loss, forgiveness, and the incredible human capacity to rebuild from the ashes. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on the choices we make, on the true meaning of family, and on what really matters in life, I ask that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any stories like this. In the comments, I want to know, which part of this story impacted you the most? Was it Michael's impossible choice? Diana's forgiveness? The fight to rebuild? Or the message that we can always rise again, no matter what life takes from us? Leave your opinion, your stories, your reflections. Share this video with someone who is going through a difficult time. With someone who lost something important? With someone who needs to hear that starting over is possible. Because stories like this are not just entertainment, they are reminders that we are stronger than we think, more resilient than we imagine, and capable of overcoming even the most devastating challenges. Thank you for watching until the end. Thank you for being part of this journey. And remember, no matter what fires you face in life, you can always rise from the ashes. Always. See you in the next story. Stay well, and keep believing in second chances.